Another political leader who allegedly has been involved in the cocaine trade is Bahamian Prime Minister Lyndon Pindling. Federal authorities have turned up witnesses who said that Pindling was paid off to provide a safe haven for, among others, Carlos Lader, identified by federal prosecutors as one of the most powerful cocaine lords in Colombia. Lader's trial on drug trafficking is wrapping up in Florida this week. NBC's Brian Ross, who first reported many of the stories detailing Lader's alleged coke empire, tonight describes how the Lader trial generated new problems for Pindling.
Of the millions of Americans who have had a love affair with cocaine, there are very few who have ever met this man, Carlos Lader. But according to federal authorities, Lader, more than anyone, is the man who first made possible the now infamous cocaine binges of Hollywood, New York, and Miami by figuring out how to bring in tons of cocaine from Colombia. For the last 7 months, the accused Colombian cocaine lord has been locked up in a specially constructed cell in the federal courthouse in Jacksonville, Florida, where he is the defendant in one of the most important drug trials ever. Because of the reputation of the Colombian drug organizations for violence, there's been extra security for the jury, the prosecutors, and the dozens of witnesses, many of them former close associates of Lader, who allegedly helped him set up his own drug base on a remote island in the Bahamas, Norman's Key. And it was here that federal authorities say the big-time cocaine business really began in the late 1970s. These pictures, now evidence in the trial, were taken by the smugglers themselves on Norman's Key. And when they weren't flying cocaine runs, there were the teenage girls brought in from Colombia and California. And every night for Carlos Lader, it was steak, lobster, and cocaine. Somehow, authorities say, this coked-up 34-year-old Colombian hoodlum managed to become America's principal supplier of cocaine from an island in the Bahamas. Much of the testimony here in Jacksonville has implicated not only Lader, but Bahamian officials he allegedly corrupted, including the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Lyndon Pindling. Now, federal prosecutors are known to be seriously considering bringing drug trafficking charges against Pindling and other Bahamians in a case that would be similar to and as much of a diplomatic nightmare as the case brought against General Noriega of Panama. Some of the most damaging testimony involving the Bahamian Prime Minister came from an admitted American drug smuggler, George Barron, who said he had personally bribed the Prime Minister, turning over a briefcase of cash to Pindling in a Bahamian casino. Prime Minister Pindling was on the Caribbean island of St. Kitts this week.
Are you going to move?
And refused to talk to NBC News about the allegations made against him in the Lader trial. But in full-page ads in American newspapers this week, paid for by the Bahamian government, the Bahamian Attorney General said there was no new evidence with the slightest credibility about drug corruption in the Bahamas. And in an interview last year with a Miami television station, Pindling denied taking any bribes and said he thought Lader was on Norman's Key to develop a resort.
I knew he was on Norman's Key because we received applications for the development of the resort complex there, which, quite frankly, I thought was a damn good idea.
In his closing argument at the Lader trial this week, U.S. Attorney Robert Merkel said all the talk about a resort on Norman's Key was nonsense. The lawyer for Lader, who presented no witnesses for the defense, said Lader was an honest businessman whose flamboyant lifestyle made him a target of American drug agents. The jury is expected to get the case tomorrow. Brian Ross, NBC News, Jacksonville, Florida.
Base for their trade. Tonight, Ross reports on the disclosures of someone who is telling U.S. prosecutors he has first-hand inside knowledge of this corruption.
This is Everett Bannister, a longtime friend and former business partner of the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Lyndon Pindling. And, according to drug smugglers, the man who says he is the Prime Minister's bag man.
Get it away from me!
When NBC News tried to talk to Bannister 3 years ago, he became very angry.
Watch out, watch out!
Later that day, the Prime Minister's office ordered restrictions that have essentially banned NBC News from the Bahamas ever since. The relationship of Bannister and Prime Minister Pindling has been the subject of allegations, investigations, and official reports in the Bahamas and the United States. But no one alleging direct knowledge has ever come forward to link the two to corruption. Now, someone has.
Deep within my father's heart, I think he realizes that it's time for us to go our separate ways.
The someone is Bannister's son, 31-year-old Gorman Bannister, who has broken with his father and is now in this country, telling American authorities about his father and the Prime Minister.
Various times the Prime Minister would have any money problems, at times of which he did. He'd call my father would give him money.
What would you guess is the amount of money your father has given Prime Minister Pindling?
And actual cash, I would have to say several $1 million.
Bannister's son is telling American authorities about the Prime Minister's new $2 million house and how his father allegedly used bribe money to pay for some of it. Bannister's son is talking about fugitive Robert Vesco, who hid out in the Bahamas and allegedly used Everett Bannister to handle huge bribes. And the story of a big payoff from another man on the run, the late Nicaraguan dictator Somoza, who sought refuge in the Bahamas. Gorman Bannister says he helped count the bribe money Somoza gave his father.
I think it was approximately $320,000.
From Somoza?
Yes. I counted out $280,000, and I separated from him because he said that he was taking that to the Prime Minister.
Under Pindling and Bannister, the Bahamas have become the Cocaine Islands, a smuggler's paradise. Gorman Bannister says his father tipped off drug smugglers on the Bahamian island Norman's Key about planned police raids. And in 1982, Gorman Bannister says he accompanied his father to Colombia, where the two met with one of the world's biggest cocaine bosses, Carlos Later, who is now in jail in Georgia.
My father and I, and Carlos, we walked across the land.
Gorman Bannister says Later told his father about an unsuccessful attempt to kill a member of the Bahamian parliament, Norman Solomon, whose car and house were firebombed when Solomon began investigating drug smuggling on Norman's Key.
Carlos told my father that he bombed Norman's car because Norman tried to depict his Colombian people as dogs and scoundrels.
Solomon was not killed in that bombing.
Unfortunately, from my father's point of view.
What did your father say?
My father said you should have killed him.
On the streets of the Bahamas, there are now many young people who are addicted to cocaine. Gorman Bannister admits he's one of them. And that's one reason he's decided to go against his father and his father's friend, Prime Minister Pindling.
I'm talking about Lyndon Pindling. I'm talking about my father and other people in the hierarchy, but that were below them.
They are corrupt.
I would say so, yes.
You know it as a fact?
Yes.
Are you prepared to talk about that to prosecutors in this country?
If necessary, yes, because it's the truth.
Even if you can't go back to your father, you can't go home?
It's irrelevant. That will always be my father, and I will always love him. But it's time for the truth.
Bannister's father and the Prime Minister have both denied all allegations of corruption. Hours after this interview, Gorman Bannister was placed under the protection of federal agents in Miami, and he is expected to be an important witness in a growing number of cases involving drugs and drug corruption in the Bahamas. Brian Ross, NBC News, Miami.